4.7 million years ago, Earth moved to a rhythm almost unrecognizable to us today. The continents were familiar in shape, yet utterly alien in spirit. Africa was warmer and wetter, a mosaic of forests, open woodlands, and early savannas stretching beneath a sky untouched by smoke or cities. The air carried the sense of damp soil, flowering plants, and animal life moving according to instincts honed over millions of years. In this world, nothing was written, nothing was preserved in stone, and nothing was meant to last forever, except the quiet inheritance of behavior passed from one generation to the next. At this time, our ancestors were not yet human in the modern sense. They walked a fragile line between the trees and the ground, between safety and exposure. Creatures such as Ardipithecus inhabited these landscapes, upright enough to walk, but still bound to the forest canopy for survival. Their hands were capable of grasping branches and simple objects, their minds alert but unburdened by language or abstract thought as we know it. They lived close to danger, surrounded by predators whose senses were sharper and whose bodies were stronger. Survival depended not on dominance, but on awareness, memory, and shared experience. Death was a constant companion in this world. Infants were lost to illness or predation. Adults fell to injury, infection, or sudden attack. There were no healers, no shelters built to protect the weak, and no concept of fate or destiny. When death came, it arrived silently and without explanation. A body that moved and breathed one moment could become still the next, transformed into something unfamiliar. For our ancestors, this transformation was not just biological, it was deeply unsettling. The stillness of a once-living being raised questions their minds could sense, but not yet articulate. Long before formal burial practices, the dead posed a problem for the living. A corpse attracted scavengers, insects, and disease. It disrupted the delicate balance of a group already struggling to survive. Leaving the body where it fell risked drawing predators back to familiar sleeping and feeding grounds. Carrying it away required effort and exposed the group to further danger. Even at this early stage, practical challenges forced behavioral responses that went beyond instinct alone. Fire, however, was not yet a controlled tool. At 4.7 million years ago, there is no clear evidence that hominins could create or manage fire at will. Flames were rare and frightening forces, appearing only through lightning strikes, volcanic activity, or prolonged droughts. Wildfires swept through forests and grasslands, reshaping the environment in dramatic and terrifying ways. Animals fled, landscapes burned, and the ground itself seemed alive with destruction. Yet within this destruction, something remarkable occurred. Fire removed bodies entirely, leaving behind only blackened earth and scattered remains. For animals watching from a distance, fire was something to be avoided. But for early hominins, observation was everything. They watched how predators reacted, how scavengers disappeared, and how the burned ground eventually returned to life. They may have noticed that where fire passed, the smell of decay vanished. Bones, once white and dangerous with scent, became brittle and scentless. Insects avoided these places. Predators did not linger. Fire, though terrifying, solved a problem that had no other answer. This is where the question begins to emerge. Who taught our ancestors how to cremate the dead? The answer may not lie in a teacher, a leader, or a sudden leap of intelligence. Instead, it may lie in imitation and survival-driven learning. When a group lost a member during or near a wildfire, the absence of decay and danger would have been noticed. Over time, patterns formed in memory. Fire did something unique to the dead. It erased them in a way nothing else could. At first, these encounters were accidental. A body left behind during a sudden blaze would be consumed without intention. The group would move on, and when they returned, the body was gone. No smell, no predators, no visible threat. This absence may have been as powerful as presence. In a world where everything left traces, fire left silence. That silence mattered. As generations passed, these observations may have shaped behavior. When death occurred near burned ground or smoldering remains, groups may have been more willing to abandon the body there, not as a ritual, not as a belief, but as a practical choice reinforced by experience. Over time, this behavior could become consistent, repeated not because it was understood, but because it worked. Cremation, in this sense, did not begin as ceremony or spirituality, it began as environmental learning. Fire was not sacred, it was effective. The concept of honoring the dead would come much later. At 4.7 million years ago, survival was the only value system. Anything that reduced risk was preserved in behavior, passed quietly from elders to juveniles through observation alone. There was no language to explain why certain actions were taken. Young members learned by watching what adults avoided and what they approached. They learned where it was safe to sleep, where water could be found, and where death should not remain. The handling of the dead, however crude, became part of this unspoken knowledge. In this way, cremation-like behavior could emerge long before belief systems or symbolic thought. This possibility challenges our modern assumptions about what defines humanity. We often associate death rituals with religion, spirituality, or complex social structures. But the roots of these behaviors may be far older, grounded not in belief but in necessity. Fire did not teach our ancestors through instruction, it taught them through consequence. The landscapes of early Africa reinforced this learning. Seasonal droughts increased the frequency of wildfires. Lightning storms ignited vast areas, forcing animals to migrate or perish. Those who survived became witnesses to fire's effects again and again. Over thousands of years, familiarity replaced fear, not comfort, but understanding. Fire was dangerous but predictable in its aftermath. As hominins evolved, their brains slowly expanded, not through sudden leaps, but through accumulated pressures. Memory improved, cause and effect became clearer. While they could not yet control fire, they could recognize its patterns. This recognition laid the groundwork for future mastery. Long before fire was held in hand, it was held in mind. If cremation-like practices existed at this stage, they were not intentional in the modern sense. No flames were lit with purpose, no bodies were placed on pyres. Instead, the dead were left where fire had passed or where it was likely to return. The distinction is subtle but important. This was not culture as we define it, but the raw foundation of cultural behavior. The dead, in turn, shaped the living. The way a group responded to loss affected its survival chances. Groups that avoided lingering corpses faced fewer predators and illnesses. Over time, these groups endured longer, raising more offspring who inherited the same behaviors. Evolution favored not just physical traits, but behavioral responses to death itself. This moment in deep time marks something profound. Life 4.7 million years ago was not only about adapting to the environment, but about adapting to mortality. Our ancestors were beginning, in the faintest way, to acknowledge that death changed the world around them, and that how they responded to it mattered. There was no teacher standing at the beginning of this path, no single ancestor who decided to burn the dead. Instead, the teacher was the land, the fire, and the silent lessons left behind in ash. Cremation, as an idea, was not born in thought, but in observation. It emerged from watching nature solve a problem that life alone could not. Much later, fire would be tamed, rituals would form, meaning would be assigned. Flames would become symbols of transformation, purification, and passage. But the origin of this relationship may stretch back far deeper than we once believed, to a time when our ancestors were barely human, standing at the edge of forests, watching the world burn, and learning, slowly, how to survive both life and death. In this ancient silence, surrounded by ash and memory, the first answers to mortality were not spoken, they were endured.